I recently finished re-listening through the book Zero Resistance Living by Dr. Maxwell Maltz and Matt Furey. This is an audiobook that is an extension of the Psycho-Cybernetics book, which is a very famous self-help book, and I enjoyed both books quite a bit. The concept of Psycho-Cybernetics is simple enough. You have some kind of internal guidance mechanism that is generally guiding you towards what you want and away from what you don't, or towards some kind of goal that you believe is good for you and away from goals that you think are bad for you. It's actually quite practical if you think about it. Imagine if you decided you were going to become a doctor, and at some point before that you were not trying to become a doctor, and then you said, I want to become a doctor. That became, at that point, your sort of focus, your target, that future state that you would like to have. And then there's something inside of you that, would guide you toward becoming a doctor. You might start going to college and taking biology courses and all of that kind of thing. Eventually you'd get to med school, all of that kind of stuff. And, eventually you become a doctor, right? Like that's how it happens. So the concepts behind Psycho-Cybernetics are not terribly controversial from a sort of basic idea. But where Psycho-Cybernetics and Zero Resistance Living become very useful is in the idea that with Psycho-Cybernetics and with Zero Resistance Living, you actually go into what Maxwell Maltz calls the theater of the mind, and you actually start to picture and believe a different version of your future based on what you want. And that's where this gets super interesting, because you see what happens with us, people, all people, is you end up getting sort of programmed to some extent by parents, teachers, authority figures, bosses. Everyone else has their idea of what you should do. What Psycho-Cybernetics does is it actually asks you the question, what do you think you should do? What would make you happy? What would make you feel successful? What do you want? And then you go into your own theater of the mind and you visualize that and you act it out and you start to make it real in your head, because it's really hard to make something real in reality if you can't actually picture it in your head. Psycho-Cybernetics basically does that. Now, Zero Resistance Living takes that a step further, and it gets into the idea of creative living, living a creative life. Now, when it says a creative life, it doesn't mean you're going to become a painter or an artist. Well, some of you will, but the idea of creative living is using the theater of your mind, using your powers of visualization, using, what it is that you want, and creatively designing that in your head and actually turning that into reality in your life. This is actually a process of dehypnosis. It's a process of basically reprogramming yourself to get more of what you want and less of what you don't, so long as those things fit in with your sort of self-image, your personal beliefs about who you are and what you want. When you actually use the theater of the mind and you actually practice creative living, you go into basically like a kind of meditation sort of state, and you really picture and feel the things that you care about, that you want. And you actually take the time to really see if it resonates with you, see if it fits who you are and your self-image, because at the end of the day, your self-image and your identity really ultimately is going to decide what you end up doing and don't doing, because you'll do the things that fit your self-image and you'll not do the things that don't. Now, one valid critique, I think, of this whole notion of zero resistance living and Psycho-Cybernetics is that taken to extremes, it can be very kind of narcissistic. Now, not everyone who uses this is narcissistic. So if you're a Psycho-Cybernetics person, you really love this stuff, that's not what I'm saying. Some people could see this as being a little too me-focused, if you will. And I think that's somewhat fair. Like if someone was totally self-obsessed and all they thought about is themselves, this could be a very self-centered kind of approach. But where I disagree with that kind of critique and where I would sort of push back against that idea is that if you are creating who you are and what you want in a way that resonates with you, ideally, that is going to be something that is not just beneficial to you, but ultimately beneficial to other people. I.e., a good use of psycho-cybernetics might be going into the theater of your mind and figuring out how you can best help other people or how you can make a positive difference in the world, as opposed to imagining how you can rip everybody off and take their money, that kind of thing. But when not taken to the extremes, I find psycho-cybernetics and creative living, that whole zero resistance living approach, to be quite useful. And the way I kind of keep myself in check is I tend to think through the process of where is God leading me, or where is a place that I can help that still fits who I am. So for me, there's plenty of things that I could do, but there's only a small handful of things that I maybe enjoy doing or really fit the way that God made me, which is different than the way God made someone else. It helps me to have clarity about what I want, what I don't want, and really spend more time programming myself toward things that resonate with the way that I was made, as opposed to just sort of like picking up whatever flies my way. Because certainly in this world, there are a lot of agendas and a lot of ideas and a lot of people trying to tell you and me what to do. And not all of those things are helpful or beneficial for us. The way I tend to use psycho-cybernetics and zero resistance living and that whole creative living process is, every few days or weeks or whatever, I will sit down, think through where I'm at, think about where I'm going, and seeing if it still fits me. And if it does, I do more of that. If it doesn't, I do less. And I try and sort of pay enough attention and check in with myself to go like, does this suit me? Does this not suit me? That kind of thing. And a lot of times it's not necessarily a big formal thing. A lot of times it's just like, thinking in the shower or on a walk, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily always have to sit down in a chair and do like a full-on visualization to get benefit from this approach. In conclusion, super quick verdict. I find psycho-cybernetics and zero resistance living to be useful. As in the world of self-help books, they're pretty dang good. Now, I believe the audiobook version is available on Audible. I couldn't find a print version unless you go to maybe psycho-cybernetics, and then they have like a more expensive package or whatever. But if you're on Audible, it's worth a listen. Now, I will say that it is a good idea to read or listen to the original psycho-cybernetics first. It has a lot of useful information and context that this book builds upon. So this is like intermediate to advanced. Psycho-cybernetics, the original, is like beginner to intermediate. I mean, it's just foundational, that kind of thing. So if you have a chance to read it, I think it's a good idea. It's a good book if you're into self-help. So verdict, creative and inspiring. 2 thumbs up. Awesome.